Hello guys and welcome back to FatbossTV. Today we're having a look at another raid boss from the Emerald Nightmare on the Legion Alpha with Elerethe Renferal.
Yes, she is a very fast-paced encounter, and throughout the fight she just keeps switching between her two forms. She's got like this spider form that looks just like Bethtalag, and then she goes into a raven form and flies about to loads of different platforms. You got to chase her and you're flying around. It's pretty fucking cool. And one really cool thing is that you're actually fighting her in like an Emerald Nightmare version of Mulgore, so you can see like Thunderbluff floating around in the background as if like the Cataclysm hit it and it's all like floating around and destroyed and shit. It's pretty cool.
It looks very, very cool. So when you first pull the encounter, you'll notice that she starts in her spider form. An ability for the tanks to worry about is Web of Pain. This is simply just a debuff that is applied to you that links you and another player together, causing all damage taken by you or that player to also be replicated on each other. So you're basically like sharing damage, kind of. This debuff actually changed multiple times while we were testing. It started off by applying just to the tank and 4 other random players, but towards the end of testing it would always just link the 2 tanks together, so we're not completely sure how this will work on live servers. It doesn't seem like you can do much to combat this debuff. Instead, you just need to keep both tanks topped up, and in times where one tank is taking particularly high damage, you just need to spam heal both of them.
But probably her most brutal ability is something called Vile Ambush. She'll ascend up into her web and then mark a location of a ranged player. She will then jump down into that area, dealing huge raid-wide damage, and the damage is reduced the further away you are from the marked location. So we decided we wanted to keep this mechanic as clean as possible, so we had all ranged players stack up on one single point and then move as a group when it came in. We used things like AoE movement speed increases. They helped out a hell of a lot, so you can just get as far away from this mechanic as possible. Now, each time the boss does cast this Vile Ambush, she'll also summon several adds called Venomous Spiderlings. Now, each of these adds have an aura that will increase the boss's damage by 50% and her attack speed by 70% if they are too close to her. And this does stack up, so if they're anywhere near the boss, the tank who's tanking her is going to die and your whole raid's going to wipe. So in order to mitigate this, we had one of our tanks pick up all the spiders and tank them away from the boss, while the other tank is tanking the spider just on the other side of the room. Now, these small little spiderling adds apply a debuff to the tank called Dripping Fangs. This is just a dot that deals really high ticking damage, and it does stack up quite quickly because you have so many of the little bastards. And because both of your tanks are webbed linked together, both of them are going to take a high amount of damage during this point, so we made sure that when this came in, we were healing both of the tanks as much as possible because there isn't that much raid damage going out, and the tanks get absolutely annihilated. Now, once the adds do die, they spawn a little patch of goo on the ground. Now, this goo just deals ticking damage to you. However, with quite a few of the adds up in like one place, you can have a lot of patches all on top of each other, which does ramp up the damage. Melee DPS and the tank need to be super careful when any of these adds die, just because you need to mitigate the overall damage that you take.
Another super brutal ability that the boss has is something called Necrotic Venom. This is a debuff that simply marks 2 players that last for 10 seconds. After the 10 seconds has run out, you'll get a brand new debuff that makes you take pretty high ticking damage over 25 seconds. However, if you take the damage near another player within a certain range of them, you'll spread the debuff onto them, and then they'll spread the debuff onto someone else. It's basically like Zul'Gurub Plague on crack. If you start spreading this, your raid will wipe almost immediately.
Yeah, it's because it ticks so frequently. Every 0.5 seconds it pulses out, and it does a really large amount of damage just to the player who's got it. It can go crazy because you can get multiple stacks of this, and yeah, if it goes wrong and it goes into melee or something or into the range group, you just wipe. You just take so much damage, it's hilarious.
And because of that, you simply just need to make sure that the first 2 players that do get the debuff and are marked for those 10 seconds, just get the hell out of the group, make sure they're stood near no one else, let their disease time out, and then they can come back. However, as soon as she has like put the debuff out and players are ticking down, you'll notice that she does actually transform into her second form, which is her rock form. And as soon as she goes into this, like, phase, I guess, she starts casting something called Gathering Clouds. And this is just an 8-second long channel, which deals relatively high consistent ticking damage on the entire group, but also pushes you back. Now, the pushback on this ability is very strong. If you run against it, you'll kind of stay in the same location. It feels very similar to the pushback on, say, G-Kun, as an example, in TOT. It's that sort of thing. You can run against it, but not forever. But because it is only 8 seconds, it's not that much of a problem. But because you are being pushed back, it's kind of a nightmare for healers. Not only is the entire raid taking a shit ton of damage, but of course you can't cast a move. And we used like a healing cooldown almost every single time this came up. However, there are certain locations throughout the room where we did feel like if you just like stood still and let the ability push you back, then potentially you could like maybe get a trank off. or something like that.
Yeah, you could have it in places as well where this ability would push you into a wall, and there is a hell of a lot of walls around this area, and of course that means you'd have to run against a pushback. You could just stand there and cast, and it's amazing, but the thing is, not all of these walls are particularly available to you because there are multiple egg sacs throughout the encounter area, and running over one of these egg sacs will spawn a group of little spiders that don't really do anything special, nor do they buff the damage or attack speed of the boss or anything. However, the ads that did spawn from these eggs were pretty fucking buggy during testing.
They were super buggy. Basically, how they were working is that it appears that they hadn't been designed properly. Like, they was like spawning in the ground.
Yeah, and they would evade, and that means they couldn't get to the mobs. And normally, if a mob evades, it just doesn't do anything. However, in a raid, most of the time, if a mob evades, it will teleport someone to it. Whoever has the highest threat will get teleported to the ad. And because healers are the only ones who had threat, healers were just getting teleported everywhere. These ads couldn't move, so they just brought the healers all around the place. It was so disorienting. So yeah, the egg sacs might be a viable strat, just breaking a couple of them during this ability and having the tank pick them up. That might be a viable strat otherwise, but on Tessie you couldn't do that because your healers were just all over the place. One thing to note while you are getting pushed back during this gathering clouds is that the 2 players who do have the debuff, they still have it at that point, and they're taking a hell of a lot of damage, and they really need to be spam healed during this point. Like me as a Holy Paladin, all I would do is just spam heal him during this point, and sometimes they would still die. It is very, very vicious, so those guys really want to be using their own personal damage reductions, and maybe even getting healing cooldowns thrown on them as well.
As soon as the boss has finished her Gathering Clouds channel, she'll immediately fly off into the sky, and at the same time, the disease spread debuff will actually drop. While up in the sky, the boss will actually start moving towards another area of the instance. There's like 3 different platforms you're fighting on. She'll just choose one of them and just fly over towards it. Also, while she is airborne, she will be doing ticking damage to the entire raid. This ticking damage does appear that it's supposed to ramp up, at least that's what is suggested. However, that didn't seem to be the case. Now, in order for you to stop taking this ticking damage, you simply just need to move over to the platform where the boss is and stand within like this purple goo that you see on the ground. This just makes you completely immune to the AoE effect. Now, during this period of time where the boss is flying about and doing AoE ticking damage to the entire raid, multiple purple tornadoes spawn, primarily on the bridges that connect each of the platforms. If you stand in any of these tornadoes, you actually are picked up, you take even more ticking damage. It's horrible, basically. Like, it's the worst thing you can do at this point in time.
Because not only that, but once it ends, the tornado will spit you out in a random direction, and that direction can be off the side of the like bridge that you're trying to run across, and you'll just fall to your death. So when you're moving over to the safe platform, you just have to do your best not to stand in these tornadoes.
However, something that can kind of help you with dodging these tornadoes is that when the boss does decide to fly off, she will also leave some feathers behind, like Alyss Resource style. However, these work slightly differently. When you pick them up, basically the next time you jump, you'll go really high in the air, and you'll sort of have like a slow fall, I guess that's the best way of explaining it. But you can sort of move in like every direction in like a really awkward vehicle style fashion.
Yeah.
So picking up one of these just completely allows you to like fly over the top of the tornadoes. Initially, we wasn't really too sure who they were for. We thought maybe the entire raid could have them, but not enough feather spawn. I think it was like 8 or something. So we decided just to let our healers have it, or some of our ranged DPS, just so they could get over, because while you have it, you can actually cast a move as well, which is a nice little benefit. So we just decided to do that. As soon as the Dark Storm is over, the boss will actually receive a buff that increases the damage of her next Dark Storm, and this just stacks up and up and up, and this is pretty much the enrage in the encounter. So the idea is that you've got to kill the boss before she flies off too many times. Also, now in her new form, she also has some extra abilities. She'll cast something called Twisted Shadows, which is again just a simple debuff that is applied to 2 players that will make them spawn tornadoes as soon as the debuff has expired. And these tornadoes work the exact same as they did in the Darkstorm, so we just made sure that the players with the debuff moved the hell away from the raid, because obviously we don't want tornadoes going all over the group and potentially throwing us off the side.
The last ability the boss will be casting in this phase is Razor Wing. This will cause her to face a random player and then start channeling this ability. When it does go off, any player in front of the boss will take a really large amount of damage and be sent flying backwards across the platform, and normally into a bunch of spider eggs or tornadoes, or even worse, you could be sent flying off the platform to your death. So we made sure that we were really quite close to the boss so that we could always move around her when this ability came in, so you would never get hit by it. But if you did get caught by it, it was really fucking disastrous, and normally you got a little bit overwhelmed.
And that's pretty much all there is to this phase. It's just those 2 abilities. And after she's like rotated through those abilities a couple of times, she will then finally return to her spider form, and then fight just repeats from that point on until you hit the enrage or she dies. And that's the encounter. So before we go into our opinions like we usually do at the end of these PTR videos, The boss is actually missing quite a few abilities from the dungeon journal. One where she is in her rock form, she will do like a swipe that will do damage split between the tanks. So yeah, the tanks are going to have to be in front of the boss the entire time. And another is that she's supposed to summon a different type of spider that will wrap players up in webs. And that means that the rest of your raid will have to switch to those webs. And if you don't, then potentially they could get hit by things such as the razor wing. That would be terrible if you're like stuck in a web and you get hit by a razor wing. Obviously you can't avoid it. But yeah, they weren't in play while testing. So maybe they're going to be mythic only. We don't know.
Yeah, it's a little unclear. But luckily those two mechanics are pretty simple. If you wanted to add anything to this, it's tanks stand in front of the boss during rock form, and DPS kill the ads even more than you are already. So yeah, that was the fight. Overall, I really did like the fight, but let's be real, it was buggy as fuck. This whole encounter was just full of hilarious bugs.
Yeah.
Like, once we wiped, people would still be getting constantly pushed back while they're out of combat. They'll be slowly getting pushed towards the boss. Of course, the teleporting spiders that would sometimes teleport you out of bounds or like directly under the map and you just die. The web bridges were really, really buggy going between like one platform to the other. Like, the texture was really not showing what was actually there. You could stand on some places where you'd think there is no bridge, but you'll just hover there.
Yeah.
And then there'll be places where you think there is a bridge and you'll just fall straight through it. So it's a little bit weird, this fight.
There's a couple of like minor things that could be fixed.
Yeah, it's alpha though.
The environment, obviously, to fight the boss looks amazing, especially if you look up, which I guess most players don't. You've got sort of bird's eye view going on half the time. But yeah, if you actually look around, it does look amazing in the skybox of the instance. And the encounter itself, I think, is very fast-paced. There's a lot to get on with. As soon as those two mechanics are added to rock form, I think that'll make that phase a lot more interesting as well.
Yeah.
And the encounter is quite punishing as it is, even with the limited abilities that are already there. So I think they did a good job of that.
Yeah, it seems like all of the mechanics in there are like purposely put in there. There's no mechanics that are just like, oh fuck it, it's a throwaway mechanic. Each mechanic is very impactful.
Yeah.
Like that necrotic venom absolutely destroys you. You've got the fucking ambush, and if you don't move from that, that will destroy you, get pushed back, and it all works with the environment. It really takes into account where you're actually fighting the boss, and all of her abilities in one way kind of forces you to deal with the limitations of the environment. You want to spread out, you actually haven't got that much space. You don't want to be hit off the platform where you're getting pushed off the back side of the platform. You've got to try and move around the tornadoes. All of the mechanics really work in the encounter area, and I really do like that part of the fight.
Well, thank you very much for watching, guys. If you did enjoy this little preview, then please do drop us down a like. It helps us out a lot. Subscribe for more, and we shall see you in the next video.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.